Hi, this is Blake.
Hi, this is Cameron. We welcome you to yet another episode of Trust Talks.
We pull back the layers on complex topics to bring you the essential knowledge, the kind that can truly shift your perspective. Today, we're tackling a distinction that is absolutely critical for any organization, really, from a bustling startup to a global enterprise.
Right.
And that's the difference between compliance and ethics.
A really fundamental one.
It is. We've been diving into some compelling material that highlights why understanding these two isn't just a good idea, it's fundamental for building trust and, frankly, avoiding some truly painful pitfalls.
Yeah, definitely.
Have you ever paused to ask yourself, is simply following the rules truly enough? Well, this deep dive might just give you some surprising answers.
It's incredibly easy to sort of conflate compliance and ethics, isn't it? To use them almost interchangeably.
Yeah, people do it all the time.
But as we'll explore today, mistaking one for the other can lead to profound, often devastating consequences. The material we're drawing from lays out not just the definitions, but clearly illuminates the very different motivations and, crucially, the long-term outcomes involved.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We really need to start by clearly defining our terms.
Yeah.
When we talk about compliance in a business context, what exactly are we referring to?
Well, at its core, compliance is about adherence. It's following the laws, the established regulations, and also your own internal policies.
Okay.
Think of it as operating within defined boundaries. Now, these boundaries can be set by external regulators, government bodies, industry standards.
Like OSHA or the EPA?
Exactly. Or they can be set by an organization's own internal rules. So, for instance, this includes things like labor laws ensuring fair wages and working conditions,
Right.
safety regulations in a factory, environmental rules about waste disposal, or financial regulations governing how a bank operates. The goal here is pretty clear. It's about following the rules to avoid legal repercussions, significant fines, and the kind of immediate damage to reputation that comes with being non-compliant.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's essentially about risk management, isn't it?
Yeah.
Creating programs to identify those risks, putting controls in place,
Precisely.
and then monitoring to make sure everyone's sticking to the script.
Exactly, setting up the guardrails.
But then how does ethics fit into this? Because the article we reviewed really stresses that ethics is something beyond just mere rule following.
Precisely, and that's the key distinction. Compliance is, you could say, a necessary baseline.
Yeah.
It's often driven largely by external pressures and the desire to avoid those negative consequences we talked about.
Yeah, the stick rather than the carrot.
Kind of, yeah. It's that foundational layer. Ethics, on the other hand, steps into a different realm entirely. It involves conducting business in a morally responsible manner.
Okay.
It's about doing what is right, even when no specific rule or regulation dictates it, maybe even when no one is watching. Okay. That's a big difference.
It is. Ethics encompasses a company's moral standards, its core values, its fundamental beliefs. We're talking things like honesty, integrity, fairness, respect in every single dealing.
With everyone. Employees, customers.
Exactly. Employees, customers, suppliers, the community. So if compliance is about avoiding problems, ethics is about a deep-rooted commitment to doing what is inherently good, fair, and responsible. It's what genuinely builds lasting trust and credibility.
So this brings up a crucial question for you to consider then. How can two concepts that seem so intertwined actually be so distinct? And why is that distinction so incredibly vital for any organization?
And that's the core of it.
And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. The material we explored gives us a fantastic framework for highlighting these differences. Let's walk through some of those key criteria, maybe starting with our core focus.
Okay.
Compliance, as we've said, is primarily focused on external rules, the things that must be done. It's about checking those boxes, essentially.
Right, the requirements. But ethics, that's all about internal moral judgment, isn't it? About decision-making based on what's truly right and fair, irrespective of whether a specific rule exists.
And this leads directly to their objectives, which are quite different. Compliance aims to meet legal and regulatory obligations specifically to sidestep penalties and legal entanglements.
Right, stay out of trouble.
Pretty much. Ethics, however, guides your behavior and decisions toward what is morally upright, often prompting you to go well beyond what the law actually requires.
Okay, so the motivations are different too then.
Absolutely. You can see how their motivations diverge. Compliance is largely driven by avoiding punishment, by escaping legal consequences or disciplinary actions. It's motivated by, a kind of fear, perhaps.
Whereas ethics is driven by something else, like a desire to do what's morally right.
Exactly, to foster trust and to genuinely maintain integrity. It's about building something positive, moving towards a higher standard, not just avoiding the negative.
So if we think about the bigger picture, compliance is about avoiding harm from external sources, while ethics is about cultivating an internal compass for what is good.
Well put. And this difference in motivation directly impacts their scope. Compliance tends to be narrower, limited to specific legal and regulatory requirements.
Okay, like what?
Think about adhering to data privacy laws like GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, or HIPAA in healthcare, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Those govern how sensitive personal and health data are handled.
Very specific rules.
Very specific. Or it could be strict workplace safety regulations. Ethics, on the other hand, has a much broader scope. It encompasses the entire moral fabric of an organization. Its values, its ethical culture, its corporate social responsibility. Everything from how you treat employees with respect and equity, to avoiding any conflicts of interest, to making decisions that truly benefit the wider community and not just the shareholders.
Okay, so compliance has those clear lines in the sand,
Yeah.
feels like, while ethics paints on a much bigger canvas.
That's a great way to put it.
And how are they enforced? That seems different too.
Very different. Compliance is typically enforced by external authorities. These are government agencies that can conduct audits, issue fines, or impose sanctions if rules are broken.
Right, the regulators.
Exactly. But ethics, that's primarily enforced internally. It's about personal conscience, the strength of your organizational culture, and also the broader expectations of society.
Interesting. So it's less formal enforcement.
In many ways, yes, though societal pressure can be very powerful. Ultimately, this distinction manifests in behavior. Compliance ensures you're doing things right, according to the letter of the law. It's about the how.
Okay.
Ethics focuses on doing the right thing, even when there isn't a specific legal requirement to do so. It's about the what.
Doing things right versus doing the right thing.
Precisely. It's the critical difference between merely avoiding breaking rules and actively striving for the best possible outcome for everyone involved.
Okay, so given everything we've just discussed, what are the real-world stakes here? I mean, if an organization doesn't grasp this distinction or ignores it, where do things typically start to go wrong?
Well, the consequences can be profound, really. One of the biggest dangers is a false sense of security, complacency.
How so?
If you equate compliance with ethics, you might start to believe that simply meeting legal requirements is enough, that you're good just because you're compliant.
Right. Ticking the boxes means you're ethical.
Exactly. And this completely overlooks deeper ethical considerations that are absolutely essential for long-term health and growth. And ironically, despite your best intentions, you can still face legal vulnerability.
Even if you're trying to be ethical.
Yes. An organization might be striving to be ethical, but if it fails to comply with specific laws due to, say, oversight or negligence, it's still open to fines, sanctions, or lawsuits.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about a company that genuinely tries to protect customer data ethically. Maybe they really value privacy. But if it breaches GDPR simply because the proper technical procedures weren't followed correctly, they're still on the hook for significant penalties. Their ethical intentions don't negate the compliance failure.
That's a powerful point. Good intentions aren't a legal shield. And what about the long-term damage? Does focusing only on compliance hurt you there?
Absolutely. Another major consequence is reputation damage. If an organization focuses only on compliance, they might neglect crucial ethical considerations. Even if they're legally compliant, public perception can be severely harmed.
Mike.
Think of a company that adheres strictly to minimum wage laws, but is widely known for treating its employees poorly. Unfair schedules, lack of respect.
Yeah.
That will inevitably lead to public backlash and a tarnished brand regardless of its legal standing. People notice that stuff.
They do. And this check-the-box mentality you mentioned.
Yeah, that mentality, born from an overemphasis on compliance, often fosters short-term thinking. Employees become focused solely on avoiding penalties, not on genuinely upholding the company's values or innovating ethically. That stifles long-term growth.
It sounds like it can really poison the culture, too.
It absolutely does. It deeply erodes organizational culture. When ticking boxes is prioritized over morally sound decisions, it creates a transactional workplace that fundamentally undermines integrity. People stop asking what's right and just ask what's required.
And that leads to bigger risks.
Definitely. Without that clear distinction between compliance and ethics, organizations face an increased risk of scandals. These are situations where something might be legally permissible technically, but is ethically questionable, and those cause immense long-term harm.
Any examples come to mind?
Imagine a company that strictly complies with advertising regulations. All the disclaimers are there in tiny print, but engages in marketing that is fundamentally deceptive or misleading.
Okay.
That might be legal technically, but it will provoke consumer outrage and destroy trust. Ultimately, all of this leads to a massive loss of stakeholder trust. Investors, employees, customers, they will disengage from an organization they perceive as ethically dubious.
And that hits the bottom line.
Directly, leading to declining market value and overall instability.
The material we looked at offers a really stark example of this with Volkswagen's emissions scandal. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Right. The VW case is, well, infamous now. Volkswagen installed what were called defeat devices in their diesel vehicles.
What did they do?
These devices could detect when the car was undergoing an official emissions test. During the test, they'd alter the engine performance to meet the legal emissions standards, so they were compliant on paper.
But only on paper.
Exactly. Once the cars were out on the road in normal driving conditions, the devices switched off and the vehicles emitted pollutants like nitrogen oxides, far exceeding the legal limits, sometimes up to 40 times higher.
Wow, so they deliberately gamed the system.
Precisely. This was a classic case of prioritizing a twisted form of compliance, just passing the test over true ethical behavior, delivering on their promise of clean diesel technology and protecting the environment.
And the consequences were huge, right?
Immense, unbelievable legal and financial penalties running into the billions, a completely ruined reputation, executives facing criminal charges, and a massive, massive loss of trust from customers and the public worldwide. When you look back at it, was it worth it?
Clearly not.
The answer is an unequivocal no. The cost was astronomically high, far, far beyond just the initial fines. It damaged the entire brand.
That case really drives home the risks, doesn't it?
Right.
But okay, it's not all doom and gloom. The material we've explored also clearly lays out the immense benefits when organizations successfully integrate both compliance and ethics. What does that look like in practice?
Right, and this is the crucial positive side. This is where businesses move from merely surviving, staying out of trouble, to truly thriving. When you consistently adhere to both legal and ethical standards, you build genuine, deep trust with customers, partners, employees, the public.
And that has tangible benefits.
Absolutely. This enhanced reputation acts like a magnet. Attracting top talent, people want to work for ethical companies and savvy investment. Investors look for stability and integrity.
Makes sense.
It also naturally leads to significantly reduced legal and financial risks. Ethical practices inherently encourage proactive risk management. You're not just reacting to violations, you're building systems to prevent them.
So fewer lawsuits, fewer fines.
Exactly, a much more stable operating environment.
So it's about being proactive, not just reactive.
Yeah.
And what about decision-making? Does that change?
Profoundly. It profoundly improves decision-making. Decisions become not just legally sound, but also morally responsible, meaning you start considering the impact on all stakeholders, employees, customers, the community, the environment, not just maximizing short-term profit for shareholders.
That sounds like it might involve tough choices sometimes.
It often does. It might mean choosing a less profitable but more sustainable path in the short term, but the evidence suggests that's a far better long-term strategy for enduring success and resilience.
The article contrasted VW with another case, right? Johnson & Johnson.
Yes, a fantastic counterexample. Think about Johnson & Johnson's response to the Tylenol tampering incident back in the 1980s. It's a classic case study in crisis management driven by ethics.
Remind us what happened.
Tragically, several people died after consuming Tylenol capsules that had been criminally laced with cyanide after leaving the J&J facilities. It wasn't their fault directly.
Right.
But Johnson & Johnson's response was immediate and drastic. They initiated a nationwide recall of all Tylenol products, about 31 million bottles, costing them over $100 million back then.
Even though they weren't legally required to do that.
Exactly. Their actions went far beyond legal obligation. They were driven by a deep ethical commitment to consumer safety, putting people before profits. They were transparent, communicated constantly, and quickly introduced tamper-proof packaging.
And the result?
It was incredibly costly in the short term, but it worked. They quickly regained public trust. Their swift ethical action meant their reputation emerged not just intact, but actually strengthened in the long run. People saw they did the right thing.
That's such a powerful example. An ethical stance becoming a strategic advantage.
Absolutely.
And it also leads to a stronger organizational culture, doesn't it? When ethics is front and center.
Without a doubt. When compliance is combined with ethical values, it fosters a positive, integrity-based culture throughout the organization. You see higher employee engagement, better morale, much greater loyalty. People feel proud to work there.
And you mentioned a competitive advantage earlier.
Yes, absolutely. Today's consumers and investors are increasingly sophisticated. They actively look for and prefer companies that uphold strong ethical standards alongside legal compliance. It's not just a nice to have anymore.
It's a differentiator.
It can truly differentiate you in a crowded marketplace. Ultimately, it lays the groundwork for long-term sustainability and significantly increased investor confidence. Ethical practices create that robust foundation for enduring success, making businesses far more reliable and attractive. Ethics really is a strategic imperative for long-term vitality.
Okay, so the why is clear, but the how? How do organizations move beyond just knowing the difference to actually building a culture where compliance and ethics work hand in hand? What are some concrete strategies?
Well, it really starts with establishing clear policies and procedures. That sounds basic, maybe, but it's critical.
What kind of policies?
Comprehensive policies that outline not just the compliance requirements, the must-dos, but also explicit ethical standards and clear frameworks for ethical decision-making. How do we handle conflicts of interest? What are our values in practice?
And just having them isn't enough, right?
Not at all. They need to be communicated clearly, consistently to everyone in the organization. And secondly, comprehensive training is vital.
Training on both.
Yes. Regular, ongoing training that educates employees on both the compliance rules and the underlying ethical principles. This empowers them to make informed, responsible decisions that align with the organization's values, not just the rule book.
So it's about understanding the why behind the rules, too.
Exactly. These aren't just bureaucratic exercises. They are fundamental tools for cultivating an intentional, principled culture.
I can see how training could shift the mindset, but policies and training only go so far without buy-in from the top, right? Leadership has to walk the talk.
Absolutely critical. Leaders must lead by example. Managers and executives have to consistently model ethical behavior and make decisions that visibly prioritize both compliance and ethics. That sets the tone from the very top.
Actions speak louder than words.
Always. It sends a clear message throughout the organization about what truly matters. It's also vital to implement robust reporting and whistleblowing mechanisms.
Safe ways for people to speak up.
Yes. Employees need secure, confidential channels to report suspected violations or ethical concerns. And crucially, the organization must ensure these concerns are addressed promptly, fairly, and absolutely without any fear of retaliation.
That builds trust internally.
It does. And finally, you must regularly review and adapt. This isn't a one-and-done thing. The regulatory landscape, societal expectations, ethical challenges, they're always shifting.
So you need to keep pace.
Continuously. You need to monitor your organization's compliance and ethical performance, get feedback, and be prepared to adapt your policies, training, and procedures as new challenges emerge. This really raises an important question for any organization listening. How continuously are you truly reviewing and adapting your own frameworks? Is it an active process?
That's a great question to pause on. So bringing it all together, what does this all mean for you, the listener, and perhaps for your own organization? This deep dive has really shown us that in the complex world of business today, simply following the rules is, well, it's never enough.
It's the floor, not the ceiling.
Exactly. Compliance acts as your legal shield. It keeps you out of immediate trouble, avoids those fines. But ethics, that's what builds something far more valuable, far more lasting. Genuine trust, an unshakable reputation, and a resilient, sustainable organization that can actually weather storms.
Mm-hmm.
The contrasting examples of Volkswagen and Johnson & Johnson powerfully illustrate the profound, real-world impact of getting this distinction right or wrong.
They really do. And to wrap it up, remember, the goal isn't to choose between compliance and ethics. It's not an either.
Right.
It's about recognizing their distinct but deeply interconnected roles. By understanding and integrating both, you create a truly robust foundation for long-term success. The active pursuit of ethical behavior, going beyond what's just legally mandated, is ultimately what drives sustainable value, fosters innovation, builds loyalty, and ensures a positive societal contribution.
So, as you reflect on your own organization, or maybe even just your personal decisions, here's a final thought to consider. Where might you be perfectly compliant? ticking all the legal boxes, but perhaps not as ethical as you could be? And what might be the true long-term cost of that distinction?
A crucial question.
Thank you for diving deep with us today. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for that ethical edge.